He was an action hero, a cultural icon, a martial arts legend.
Here it is the natural instinct, and here is control. You are to combine the two in harmony. Not if you have one to the extreme, you will be very unscientific.
He was an action hero, a cultural icon, a martial arts legend on the cusp of superstardom. I'm Lawrence Fishburne. On July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee died tragically at the age of 32.
For over 3 decades, the world has mourned the tragic loss of Brandon Lee, the rising Hollywood star who was taken far too soon. Son of martial arts icon Bruce Lee, he had a bright future ahead, but a tragic onset accident while he filmed The Crow cut his life short. Now, 32 years later, something unbelievable has happened. His tomb had to be opened for maintenance purposes, and what they discovered when the grave was removed left everyone in absolute shock. Could this finally bring long-awaited answers to the mystery of Brandon Lee's death? Or did it raise even more chilling questions? A shocking request. The world welcomed Brandon Lee as a future star on February 1, 1965, in Oakland, California, and said its last goodbye to him on March 31, 1993, on the set of the movie The Crown, when he was only 28 years old. His remains rest at Lakeview Cemetery in his hometown of Seattle. He rests next to his beloved father at this somber gravesite, where their timeless bond remains as absolute in death as it was in life. Thousands of fans visit the cemetery every year, honoring a legacy that fate destroyed too soon. And it's this constant affluence of people paying their respects that caused something Linda Lee Cadwell, Brandon's mother, could have never expected. After the 30th anniversary of Brandon Lee's death, Linda received a request from the Seattle City Council to permit grave maintenance. According to the authorities, the earth on which Brandon's remains rested was suspiciously unsettled, and an unexpected crack had appeared on the stone. Experts believed someone had voluntarily or involuntarily stepped on Brandon's grave, disturbing the ground and ruining the stone. But the crack could also have been caused by burrowing animals, a small quake that might have gone undetected above ground, or structural issues in the grave itself. The fact that Bruce Lee's grave seemed intact despite being so close to Brandon's was a mystery itself, one that the city council intended to solve before it made the news. The proposal triggered painful memories within Linda. She had buried her husband and her son within a few years from each other, despite not having planned to outlive either. And now she was being asked if a bunch of strangers could pull her son's body from his final resting place, disturbing his eternal sleep and threatening his peace in the afterlife. Could her heart endure this new heartbreak, or would it finally shatter for good? She was tempted to deny permission to open her son's tomb, but at the same time, she acknowledged that the site needed protection for future visitors. She knew full well how much people still loved and cherished Bruce and Brandon's memories, and she knew that fans across the planet would be heartbroken if the city of Seattle permanently denied them permission to visit their heroes' burial places. So she said yes. Mindful of her sacrifice, management personnel at Lakeview Cemetery spared no expenses for this sensitive initiative. A specially constructed climate structure enclosed Brandon's tomb to provide the atmospheric conditions required for advanced preservation steps. Unique lighting solutions and perfect visibility protected materials from harm by maintaining temperature control in the area. Security requirements became critical for the cemetery because they implemented unique protection procedures for site security and burial privacy during this event. Everything was done to ensure that Brandon Lee's body would not suffer the operation. Only authorized team members received clearance to enter the work zone, with each person thoroughly briefed on handling protocols. Linda Lee Cadwell provided the team with detailed information about the tomb's contents, sharing personal records she had maintained since Brandon's passing. Her insights proved invaluable as the team prepared their equipment and procedures. But despite the request for privacy, a crowd soon gathered outside the cemetery as soon as the news spread. The tomb of Brandon Lee, the actor who had shocked the world with his untimely death on a movie set, was about to be opened after 32 years. And as soon as the maintenance workers saw what was hiding inside the tomb, a single question made headlines across the city of Seattle. Had Brandon always known he was going to die a shocking death just like his father? Like father, like son. From early childhood, Brandon trained under his father, Bruce Lee, who taught him everything he needed to know as a martial artist. But the bond between father and son went beyond sport and discipline. The sudden death of Bruce Lee in 1973 created both an immovable legacy and an identity crisis for Brandon. What was he supposed to do now? Should he train to be a martial arts master and actor like the world expected him to, or should he honor his father's legacy some other way? Brandon had shown extraordinary skill as a child, kicking through an inch-thick board at 5. However, the shadow of Bruce Lee loomed over him, primarily as he trained in dojos filled with his father's image. This internal battle led Brandon to walk away from martial arts for a time, opting for soccer instead. However, that was not his destiny. Brandon became rebellious during his teen years, which led to his expulsion from school. His father's untimely passing had left a huge void in his heart, and he struggled to find meaning in his life. He was filled with a rage he didn't know how to express, much like Bruce Lee before he learned to channel his feelings into his craft. But he had no interest in martial arts, not yet. Not when they reminded him so painfully of the father he'd lost too soon. Life was not easy for Bruce Lee's son. Every move he made was scrutinized and compared to his father's, with people struggling to understand why he wouldn't just follow in his footsteps as a martial arts master. Nobody seemed to realize that Brandon didn't just want to be remembered as his father's mediocre son, and that he was longing to build a life of his own, far from the spotlight that had taken Bruce away from him. But eventually, the pull towards the entertainment world became irresistible. So he acquired his GED diploma and relocated to New York City to try his hand at acting. Surprisingly for many, he proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that his acting abilities were greater than anything his father had achieved, and eventually went on to study at the prestigious Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute. In 1985, Brandon Lee returned to Los Angeles, unknowingly stepping onto the path defining his short but unforgettable career. He started as a script reader, but fate had bigger plans. When casting director Lynn Stallmaster approached him, Lee landed his first credited role in Kung Fu, the movie, a moment that felt almost destined. After all, the original Kung Fu series was originally meant for his father, Bruce Lee. Was this Brandon's chance to reclaim what his father never got, or was the world's way of telling him his destiny had been planned from the beginning? Initially, Brandon refused to take on the role because he wanted no part in martial arts films, nor did he wish to challenge his father's monumental reputation. But the casting directors brought him together with his previous teacher, Jeff Imada, until the instructor persuaded him to do the project. Through his character in the film, Brandon Lee portrayed the secret son of Kwai Chang Caine, David Carradine. On February 1, 1986, Brandon made his official film debut through his role in the movie. Then he starred in his first lead position through the Hong Kong action crime thriller, which was released as Legacy of Rage during the same year. Laser Mission represented a high-octane thriller that director Don Sharp filmed on location in Namibia in 1990. While critics dismissed it as a B-movie, the film became a cult hit on home video. But behind the scenes, Lee was evolving, returning to intense martial arts training with Dan Inosanto. He even recorded his sessions to perfect movements for the big screen, just like his father had done years before. By this time, Brandon had accepted the fact that he would indeed follow in his father's footsteps by starring in action films. And when Alex Proyas came looking for him for a movie called The Crow, he was ready for what he thought would be his biggest film yet. Unbeknownst to him, it would also be his last. The accident that cut his life short. When fans of Bruce Lee across the world learned of his son's death, a shocking question rose on their shaky lips. Was Brandon Lee's fate predetermined by hidden forces, or was his tragic death simply a result of unfortunate circumstances? What was meant to be just another scene turned into a real-life nightmare. In a moment that never made it into The Crow, Eric Draven, played by Brandon Lee, was scripted to be shot by the ruthless funboy, Michael Massey. But as the cameras rolled, tragedy struck. Lee was hit in the abdomen, not with a harmless blank, but with a deadly fragment of a dummy bullet that had been unknowingly lodged inside the gun's barrel from a previous scene. The .44 Magnum had been loaded with blanks, carelessly assembled by a crew member who removed the gunpowder from live rounds. When the blank was fired, it propelled the hidden fragment with the force of a real bullet, striking Lee from just 15 feet away. He collapsed, suffering catastrophic internal injuries and massive blood loss. Hours of emergency surgery at New Hanover Regional Medical Center could not save him. No criminal charges were filed, but the shocking negligence could not be ignored. Linda Lee Cadwell, Brandon's devastated mother, launched a lawsuit against the producers and 13 other companies and individuals. His fiancée, Eliza Hutton, also joined in. This tragic incident eventually led to a settlement, but that night continues to haunt the survivors. DreamQuest Images, alongside stuntman Chad Stahelski, finished the Crow production after Brandon Lee's tragic passing. To this day, I still believe Brandon would have wanted the film finished and done well, Stahelski later shared, and finished it was. The Crow became a cult classic, forever haunted by the tragic fate of its star. But was it all just a terrible accident, or was there something more? An eerie twist of destiny that Brandon Lee had unknowingly walked into. When his tomb was eventually opened, 32 years after his death, this chilling theory seemed to have found undeniable proof. Opening the tomb. It was a bright spring morning when maintenance workers of the Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle grabbed the headstone of Brandon Lee's tomb and moved it out of the way to reveal his coffin. Everything inside the small chamber appeared untouched. The air remained stationary and filled with respect, while a subtle essence from the burial ritual still clung to the atmosphere. Experts rushed to inspect the stone and the ground, looking for clues that could explain the sudden disturbances at the site. Beside the crack, the grave looked well preserved and showed no other signs of decay. The earth was stale and dry, confirming that no burrowing creatures had disturbed Brandon Lee's resting place. The experts' initial assessment seemed to be correct. Someone had, voluntarily or not, stepped onto Brandon's grave during a visit to the cemetery, ruining the stone but causing no further damage. As the authorities scrambled to produce a new stone to replace the cracked one, Linda Lee Cadwell found herself looking at the coffin that contained her son's body. She didn't know what to feel. On one hand, she was glad that this process would be over soon, and Brandon's rest would resume undisturbed. On the other, she felt an unexplainable pull towards the coffin and everything that rested inside. But before she could even lay a hand on the wood, something else caught her eye. On the ground, next to the coffin, were several items that Brandon's friends and colleagues had put inside the grave as a last farewell. Signed pictures, heartfelt letters, small memorabilia from movie sets, and other items were scattered on the earth, reminding her that her son had been loved until his very last moment. All memorial display items kept their funeral placement without any change despite the passage of time. Brandon's family and friends had protected the traditional burial customs so precisely that they established a timeless sanctuary. As they installed the new stone, the maintenance workers handled everything in the tomb with great respect. Every time they stumbled onto a new item, they would ask Linda whether she wanted to take a closer look. Despite being overcome with emotion, she decided to glance at some pictures, just to see her son smiling one more time. The most emotionally charged find within Brandon's tomb was an untouched collection of sealed letters that had waited since his burial. These weren't just correspondence, but final messages and tributes from those closest to him. Each letter was carefully preserved in specially treated envelopes to protect them from time's decay. Reading these letters after all these years would bring back both the pain of loss and the strength in continuing his work. Yet, could there be secrets within them that had never been made public? Linda found herself in a precarious position. If the letters had been sealed, perhaps the senders didn't want them to be opened. Perhaps those messages were meant for Brandon's eyes only. But what if she found something meant for her? The whole world had seen her standing over the grave on the day of the funeral. Maybe someone had decided to leave her something special to remember her beloved son by. With this possibility in mind, Linda decided to open the letters. Her eyes filled with tears as she read intimate details about Brandon's life, from his closest friends' points of view, shared dreams, and the future he had planned before his untimely passing. The preservation team noted how the letters shifted in tone from raw grief in the earliest ones to a growing determination in those written closer to the funeral. The later letters spoke of promises to ensure his legacy would live on, to protect his artistic vision, and to share his message with future generations. These weren't just farewell notes. They were a blueprint for keeping Brandon's vision alive, infused with the principles he lived by. Yet, among the carefully preserved correspondence, one letter stood apart. It was sealed differently, with a symbol that resembled intertwined dragons. Linda gasped in shock when she noticed the symbol. Bruce Lee's nickname was the Dragon, and she remembered how much Brandon cherished the symbolism when he was a child. Dragons are powerful, mythical creatures of wisdom and strength, just like his father had been, just like he had hoped to be when he grew up. Could Brandon have forged a symbol that represented both him and his father? Linda knew that no one else would have used such a symbol. So when she was asked whether she wanted the letter opened, she said yes. And what she saw stunned the whole world. The discovery that stunned the world. When the preservation team carefully opened this distinctive envelope, they discovered something that shocked them. A final message from Brandon himself, written just days before his death, as if he had sensed what would come. In his characteristic handwriting, the letter said, "The journey we began together never ends. The limitations you perceive are illusions of the mind. Be water, flow through obstacles, adapt to challenges, and find strength in your formlessness. But above all, remember this. Your true path emerges not from following my way, but from discovering your own. Empty your cup to fill it with your wisdom." The message immediately brought tears to Linda's eyes. She hadn't expected to read something written by Brandon ever again, and to find a hidden letter inside his own coffin was almost too much for her broken heart to bear. She was about to close the letter again and leave the cemetery at once to find solace in the quiet of her own house when a stunning thought struck her. Why would Brandon write something like this? Had he known his time was almost up? And who had put the letter in the coffin? Some of his friends or colleagues must have hidden the letter inside the grave. Perhaps Brandon himself had asked them to hold on to it until the time to let it go was right. But that didn't explain how he seemed to have known that his life was about to come to an abrupt end. Had something happened on or off set that might have made him nervous or even scared for his life? Suddenly, memories of the phone call that had shattered her heart came back to Linda. The authorities had spoken of a terrible accident, a mistake that had cost her son's life. But what if it hadn't been just a mistake? What if someone had left that bullet fragment inside the gun on purpose to get rid of another foreign actor who was becoming too famous, too beloved, too soon? As she rambled to the maintenance workers around her, Linda realized how stunned they all were. They could hardly believe that the horrible accident on the Crow set had not been an accident after all, and yet they seemed ready to accept this theory as the truth. But if Brandon had known that something was going to happen to him, why had he only left behind this cryptic message instead of a concrete lead? This was not the son Linda knew. Brandon would have tried to help her solve his murder even from beyond the grave, if he had even remotely suspected someone was trying to take him out. No, there had to be another explanation. She just needed to look far back into the past to find it. And when she did, her heart broke all over again. Linda sobbed as she thought back to all the times where Brandon had offhandedly remarked that he was going to die young, perhaps younger than his father. That father he would never surpass in any field, let alone longevity. Had Brandon gone through his whole life knowing he would never grow older than Bruce Lee? Had he shouldered this burden for 28 years, unable to confess to his mother or sister or closest friends? The thought sliced deep into her chest, and yet Linda found it easy to accept it as the truth. Brandon had lived his entire life in his father's shadow, and his death had been just a natural product of a destiny that had been written long before he was even born. He had followed in Bruce Lee's footsteps, and just like Bruce Lee, he too had met his end before his time. He had always known he would die without ever living up to his father's legacy, and he had left this confirmation in his own grave for her to find one day, so she could make peace with the truth too. But how could a mother ever make peace with such painful knowledge? She couldn't. She never would. Her heart had already bled too much. But there was one thing she could do. She would share Brandon's last message with the world, so everyone would remember him not just as Bruce Lee's son, but as a lovely young man with a big heart and an even bigger weight on his shoulders. She knew fans would be stunned. She knew they would be just as heartbroken. But she also knew Brandon would never be forgotten. "The journey we began together never ends," he'd written in that letter, and she would make sure his journey into the hearts of his fans would last forever. Do you think this is the real message Brandon Lee meant to share, or is there another hidden meaning behind his words? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.